All right, this is Terry Rogers, and Ree Evans is here with me, and we're going to take you through the agency tiered supports consultants, so the regional office staff who do tiered supports consultation role in getting agencies who are participating in tiered supports understanding and doing positive and negative observations, and the ATSC's role in their own positive and negative observations. We'll briefly also practice positive and negative observations through some videos. And so this is training for the ATSCs to learn their role.
We're also going to focus on your role as consultants, so not just doing the plus-minus observation, but gathering the data, analyzing the data, and talking about it. So plus-minus observational data, as you all know, is what we use to measure, is it working when talking about tools of choice. It's a 10-minute staff-client interactional observation measuring positive interactions, which would be stay close, cool, random routine, and use reinforcement, and negative interactions, which is coercion. It can be what we call isolated observations, which looks at one staff's behavior with all of the clients present, or environmental, which measures all staff's behavior with all clients present. The environmental is what we use when conducting things like assets, and then reliabilities and plus-minus observations that you are doing weekly with your agencies would be the targeted observations measuring one staff's behavior. Reliabilities are when agency tiered supports consultants work with agency coaches. You go out and you do the same observation, same exact time with the same staff. So you're looking at the same DSP's behavior with all clients that are present at the time.
And you make a comparison.
And you compare your data, you talk about it, see what's similar, what's different. Currently, we advise one reliability or one positive and negative observation if coaches are not available per week. As you scale up and coaches are stronger, we can rethink that number of observations. If you're doing this differently, please let us know in the chat box. Okay. So this is just a copy of our current positive-negative observation form. This is what the front looks like. And then this is what the back looks like.
We do request that whenever you copy these forms, you copy front and back, so you have the cheat sheet information with you at all times. So please don't just copy the front, copy front and back.
And we also request that you refer to the SharePoint when printing out new observation forms, because that is where the most up-to-date form is located. So ATSC expectations in regard to positive and negative would be you perform the environmental asset observations. You train agency staff on how to do observations themselves. You could use PowerPoints, videos, and then go on site and use BST, model, practice, feedback. You would conduct reliabilities with agency coaches. Again, reliabilities, you and the coach are observing at the same exact time and actively comparing, discussing, and analyzing differences and similarities in the data collected. You would perform ongoing weekly positive, negative observations with DSPs or coaches at each agency, and then gathering the data from your agency and entering it into the monthly report, or in your, if you have a separate Excel file where you're keeping track of individual staff or houses, you would enter it there. And you want to share and discuss data at the monthly A-team meetings. That's really important.
Okay. So we have something in the chat box. The coercion total on the cheat sheet, it is 11 tallies, but it's marked as 14. Okay, well, we'll look at that and make a correction. Thanks for noticing that.
So how you would gather the data is direct observation. So you're going out there yourself and doing an observation. You could gather data, ask the agency coaches for their observation data, and then compare that with what you are directly observing, and then you would have your reliabilities where you are out there at the agency doing the same observation at the same time. And that's used to compare fidelity with the coaches.
So basically, it's the ATSC's responsibility to get the data from the agency. We're not waiting for the data for the agency to live up to the expectation. We are going out and making it as easy as possible. If that means texting them, calling them, having it faxed to you, driving to the agency, whatever it takes, it's your responsibility to get the data.
So when you're asking your agency for positive, negative data, be specific. Don't just say, hey, I need data from you. Instead, ask for positive, negative interactional data and any data related to their action plan. Again, like Terry said, you could text them, you could physically go out and pick up the information, you could send an email, you could pick up the phone, whatever you have to do to get the information from them. So how to do an observation, you would observe the setting for 5 minutes, look at the desirable and undesirable behaviors that the individuals might be emitting, and then you would do your 10-minute observation and tally behaviors and reactions in the boxes. Again, asset observations are environmental. They're targeting all staff present, and then reliabilities and all other positive, negative observations target individual staff. And when looking at examples of desirable and undesirable behavior, you want to look for high-risk behavior, low-risk behavior, and be very specific in what you're seeing.
So one of the things on the positive negative form is a space for you to identify the desirable and undesirable behaviors that you observed during your pre-observation, your 5-minute getting used to the setting observation, so that will help you to gauge when interactions are happening with staff and to be prepared to take data when you see those reactions. This also helps you go back and discuss the observations with the staff if they've missed an opportunity for pivot, or if they were missed an opportunity for reinforcement, or using coercion, any of those things. Then you can remember what behaviors you had observed in the environment, and you can check and see if they observed the same things. So some examples of desirable behaviors, you guys all know this, but it could be cooking, putting away plates, doing laundry, waiting, drinking a juice, hanging out. And undesirable behaviors could include things like tearing things off the wall, making noises, poking other residents, repeating the same words over and over. So it could be significantly challenging behaviors or even junk behaviors. They're all undesirable, and those are the things that staff might react to or might correctly not react to with pivot. So that when you're conducting that pre-observation, that's when you want to notice those examples of desirable and undesirable behaviors that are happening in the environment. Okay. So we have another question. We want reliability a week per ATSC. Is there some benchmark for reliabilities with agency coaches?
So the reliabilities, so we suggest reliability with the ATSC and the agency coach per week. So per agency. So if you are working with 2 agencies, you would have 2 reliabilities a week with that coach. If the coach is unavailable, then you would just do a positive, negative observation on the DSP yourself. So it would be a direct observation.
So and if an agency has 5 coaches, what you want to do is help them to choose who's their lead coach, and that's the person that you're going to focus your reliabilities on, and then set up the agencies to do reliabilities amongst themselves. The whole idea of reliabilities is that we're all looking at the same thing and we're all getting pretty much the same data. Within 80 to 90% is what we're looking for. Higher is better, of course. So you want the agency to be looking at that amongst their coaches, and you want to be a standard with their lead coach, so that their lead coach takes data the same way you do. The lead coach makes sure all the coaches underneath them take data the same way they do, and that's why it's a pyramid system of making sure we all have high reliability.
So for this form, you would tally for 10 minutes. You would mark what reinforcement you saw, what stay close, cool, random routine you witnessed, and any coercion. And if the individual did any desirable or undesirable behavior. These are simple tallies. You can make notes on the side too if that's helpful for you when giving feedback to staff or to the agency. So for example, John waited his turn to watch TV. You would tally a desirable behavior. Staff reinforced him. You should feel accomplished for waiting. You would tally for reinforcement. Staff had to stay close cool with John about the TV show he likes, so you would tally for the stay close skill being used, 1 for each skill. So now we're going to practice coding an observation using one of our pivot videos.
So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pretend we're doing our 5-minute get used to the environment observation and checking for desirable and undesirable behavior. So we're going to watch the video through one time, and I want you to just jot down the types of desirables and undesirable behaviors that you observe in the video. So this is your pre-observation. We're going to use the same video for our positive-negative ratio observation, but this is just to get used to seeing what you see in the environment. Jot down what positive and negative behaviors you see.
And then enter into the chat box when you're done.
Do you have a ton of homework like me?
Hey guys, what are you working on?
Oh, I got so much homework and it's so hard.
Francesca, stop complaining about your homework. You always complain about your homework.
Well, it's hard.
Well, why don't you just be like Wes and get started on it, and then you can get done with it and you won't have to complain.
Because it's hard and I don't like it and I don't want to do it.
Well, I'm sorry. We don't like to do a lot of things that we have to do, but that's just life. So I need you to get started on it so that Wes doesn't have to wait on you for snack later, okay? Get started. Pick up a pen. And work. Use it for what it's useful for.
Okay, so we're looking for you to tell us you're done or to jot down what you saw. Which one do you want?
I want you guys to enter in the chat box the number of desirable behaviors you saw and the number of undesirable behaviors you saw.
I don't know if I gave them instructions. Can you show us the chat box?
In a minute, I think I can. I just have to.
We still need the video.
I can't give you both. I can either share my screen, or I can give you the chat box.
Okay. Nobody's writing in the chat box. We're making note of both consumers' behaviors.
Yes. Someone asked, were we making note of both consumers' behaviors? The answer is yes.
So if you didn't tally them, just write to us in the chat box what you saw, what was desirable, what was undesirable.
So we have one person put that they saw 4 undesirable and 3 desirable behaviors.
Okay, good. So we saw doing homework, picked up pen were desirable. All right. And what kinds of undesirable behaviors? Anybody write in a description of what they saw for undesirable behaviors?
We have another comment of 4 desirable and 5 undesirable.
Okay, good. Amy put clicking, pen, complaining, making face were undesirable. And Kathleen put complaining, loud talking, tapping pen, and arguing. Okay, so I agree with those undesirable behaviors. The poor guy there has been working on homework the whole time, and that was pretty much the only desirable behavior other than picking up the pen that I saw. But when I counted 1 continuous desirable behavior of doing the homework. We could talk about picking up the pen and whether that was desirable, and if we were trying to do a pivot, we probably would have counted that as desirable. But yeah, sitting in the chair is desirable. So yeah, if you were doing a pivot, you'd want to probably pay attention to that too. And when Rhea and I did this, we found 8 undesirable behaviors, all of them of Jessica. And is that her name? I forgot what her name was.
I don't know.
Francesca, that's what it is.
Francesca.
And they were things that you're talking about. I'm glad somebody caught the making faces, because that's the end undesirable behavior that probably that staff person missed. So you can see that it's important to get used to seeing what's happening in the environment and noticing the kinds of behaviors. We're not focusing right now on reliability for the desirable and undesirable behaviors, the frequency of them. I'm not worried really about the number you saw as I am about the types of behaviors you saw, because we'd have to really get specific about when is one behavior happening and when does the next behavior happen in order to get reliability on that. But we can be very reliable on the types of behaviors that we saw, and that's what we're really focusing on right now, and in our tiered supports process. But it's very important to get used to the environment and pay attention to what you're seeing. And if you were looking for tools use from your staff, you can see that you'd have a lot of discussion points the more that you're noticing. So if you're noticing sitting in the chair and continuously working and staying focused, those kinds of things, you've got a lot of positives that you could be paying attention to in this video for pivot. So those are all important things to pay attention to and notice in your pre-observation. And now we're going to get ready to do the observation. So we're going to watch the video again. This time you're going to score it as if you're doing a positive, negative observation. So you're going to use those categories in the observation sheet, and you're going to tally the staff's behavior. So the staff is the person that comes in and stands behind them and does the talking, not the 2 people at the table. And you're going to tally the behavior of the staff. And we're saying it's a new interaction or a new behavior of the staff when there's been a pause of more than 5 seconds. So 5-second pause, new behavior.
And then when we're done with the video, please enter what you had for positive and negative for the staff into the chat box.
Do you have a ton of homework like me?
Hey, Hey guys, what are you working on?
I got so much homework and it's so hard.
Francesca, stop complaining about your homework. You always complain about your homework.
Well, it's hard.
Well, why don't you just be like Wes and get started on it, and then you can get done with it, and you won't have to complain.
It's hard and I don't like it. I don't want to do it.
Well, I'm sorry. We don't like to do a lot of things that we have to do, but that's just life. So I need you to get started on it so that Wes doesn't have to wait on you for snack later, okay? Get started. Pick up a pen. And work. Use it for what it's useful for.
Okay, so we'd like a response from everybody on. So please write in the chat box what your numbers look like for your tallies. Heck, I know you've asked this before, but we're the only ones that can see all the chat answers, right? Okay, thanks. So we're looking for number here, number of positives and number of negatives.
We're still waiting on a few people to get their numbers in. All right, so we have some 1 to 5s, 1 to 6, 0 to 5, 1 to 1. So we're all, for the most part, other than the 1 to 1, we're all pretty close. When Dr. Rogers and I coded this video, we had 1 to 4.
So remember, we said a 5-second pause in the staff's talking would equal a new behavior. So the person who put the 1 to 1, you're going to have a problem getting reliability under those instructions because there were several 5-second pauses for the staff's behavior. So a new behavior occurs with a 5-second pause, and that's why we had 1 to 4 as our ratio. And what we would do if we were doing reliability with somebody is we would talk to them about where did you get the 5, when did you count a new behavior, and you'd want to go through it to figure out why are we scoring differently, because we want to all be around the same ballpark of number of responses positive and number of responses negative of the staff. So the first positive and the only positive that most of us saw, I believe, is that we want to, is when she comes in and says, hey guys, what are you doing? That's the first and only positive that Rhea and I scored. Did anyone score a different staff response as positive?
Someone said, didn't we also say that if the individual speaks between what the staff says and when they respond, that it is a new interaction as well? Yes, that is correct.
So Did everyone agree on that as the one positive when she comes in and says, hey guys, what you doing? Did anyone have anything different as a positive? Okay, good. So we have 100% agreement on positives for those of us that scored one positive. And then what we'd want to try to do is figure out where the variation is coming in the negatives of staff. And she has a couple of times where she adds something to a comment that she's just made, and it's not quite 5 seconds. So I'm betting that's around where we had a difference. And I'm pretty good with us being a couple of counts off. I wouldn't want to be more than 2 off before I started trying to figure out where our differences were in our accounting of negatives. So the only one that's really, there are only a couple of people that were really way off, and I'm going to ask you folks if you would score differently now that we've had some discussion. So the person who put 1 long negative, would you score differently now that we've had some discussion? And the person who put 3, would you score differently? And that they both agreed. So this is how it's done, where you're talking about, we want to try to be as reliable as possible. So where did we get our differences? And when you have a video, you can score again. So during practice sessions, you can score again and see if you'll get them correct. And then during real-life observations, you have this discussion, and then they have the discussion with their coaches, their fellow coaches, and everybody gets closer together in their scoring, and that way we have better reliability and we can trust our data. So you're going to do another one?
Yeah, so now we're going to practice again using another video, same instructions as the first time. We're going to start off looking, this is from Big Bang Theory, so we're going to start off looking at Penny's desirable and undesirable behavior. So Penny is our individual in this video. So just jot down the specific desirable and undesirable behaviors you see and tally those up, and then put them in the chat box when you're done.
Well, thank you. How thoughtful. Would you like a chocolate?
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
What was that? You said be nice to Penny. I believe offering chocolate to someone falls within the definition of nice.
It does, but in my experience, you don't.
Oh, sorry, Sheldon. I almost sat in your spot.
Did you? I didn't notice. Have a chocolate.
Thank you.
What's this cartoon called again?
It's not a cartoon. It's anime.
Anime. You know, I knew a girl in high school named Anime. Anime Fletcher.
You're here a lot now.
Oh, am I talking too much? I'm sorry. Zip.
Thank you. Chocolate?
Yes, please. Oh, hey, Kim. Yeah, you know what? Hold on. Let me take this in the hall.
All right, so please put in the chat box any desirable and undesirable behaviors you saw from Penny, as well as your count for each.
Okay, so we're waiting for some responses in the chat box so we can move on.
Awesome. So we have a couple, 3 desirables, 0 undesirable, 5 positive, 4 negative. Picking up dishes, polite manners, moved from Sheldon's spot, sitting on the couch, took a call to the hallway were all positive, desirable behaviors. Good job. Desirable of getting plates, going to the hall, moves over, stops talking. Undesirable would be answering the cell phone. Good job. Watching TV, sitting on the couch, saying please and thank you are all positives noted. Good job there. We have for undesirable, talks during the show, sat in his spot, answered call during the show, used a high-pitched laugh. Excellent.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. All right, so now we're going to practice looking at Sheldon's behavior as the staff member. So we're going to code Sheldon's positive and negative interactions with Penny. It won't be 10 minutes, but we're just going to do a little bit of a practice, and then when we're done with the video, please make sure that you enter your positive and negative ratio into the chat box. Thank you.
Are you finished?
Well, thank you. How thoughtful. Would you like a chocolate?
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
What was that?
You said be nice to Penny. I believe offering chocolate to someone falls within the definition of nice.
It does, but in my experience, you don't.
Oh, sorry, Sheldon. I almost sat in your spot.
Did you? I didn't notice. Have a chocolate.
Thank you.
What's this cartoon called again?
It's not a cartoon. It's anime.
Anime. You know, I knew a girl in high school named Anime. Anime Fletcher.
You're here a lot now.
Oh, am I talking too much? Oh, sorry. Zip.
Thank you. Chocolate?
Yes, please. Oh, hey, Kim. Yeah, you know what? Hold on. Let me take this in the hall.
All right, so now we're just going to wait for you guys to put your positive and negative ratios in the chat box before we move on. We have a couple in, but I'm going to wait until they're all in to read them. So we're just waiting on a couple more. Okay, so we have 6 to 4, 6 to 1, 6 to 2, 4 to 3, and 5 to 2, and 5 to 4. What Dr. Rogers and I got when we coded this was 8 to 2. One thing that we might have done differently is we coded every time he gave her a chocolate separate from the thank you or whatever verbalization he gave as well. So that might be part of our discrepancy. I don't know. Did anyone else code the giving of the chocolate as a separate behavior?
Okay, good.
All right. Some people are saying yes. Good.
So just a note of consensus. We always put the positive first and the negative second whenever we're talking about it. So somebody had that switched around. That way we don't have to wonder, are you talking about positive first or negative first? So we always say the positive number and then the negative number. So the ratio is 4 positives to 1 negative, or 6 positives to 4 negatives. So I'm a little bit curious. Cindy, you had 4 negatives, and Amy, you had 3 negatives. Everybody else is in the ballpark of 2. I'm wondering if you can remember what things you counted as negative. And if you can remember some of them and list them out, that would be helpful for us to figure out. So one of the things you can see is that this isn't cut and dried. It's going to take some consensus about what's a new response of a person and whose behavior are you counting. So when Ree gave the instructions, she said you were looking at Sheldon's behavior. So we're not looking at Leonard's behavior, and we're not counting that. If we were doing an environmental observation where we're looking at everything in the environment, then we would have counted Leonard's behaviors too. But in this case, we're looking at Sheldon's behavior. Sheldon's the one that took the tools, and he really paid attention and used reinforcement. So we're not counting any of Leonard's negatives. So if anyone's counting Leonard's, then that's probably a place where we had differences in our negatives also. Some people counted facial expressions separate from the verbal interactions. And so all of these things are things you discuss with your coaches, and it's really a matter of consensus. We're making the consensus of 5 seconds pause. We counted the candy different because it was a little bit extra above and beyond in the positives.
It was a separate, we counted it as a separate behavior because it was no longer a verbalization, it was an action.
Yeah. But that's something that we'd have to come to consensus with, and we didn't talk about that before. So all of these things need to be talked about, and really, if we were trying to publish this or it was really critical in terms of something that we were doing, we would want to be very, very precise. What I'm looking for is that we're overall looking at the positives the same and the negatives the same, whether we break one interaction into 2 responses or not. It's going to wash out in our numbers if we always do it the same. So that's the thing that we want to get to. So Amy says there was a sarcastic tone about being anime instead of cartoon, and so she was very precise in looking at the tone of voice and body language. Of course, if you were doing that, you would want to pay attention to the body language and tone of voice to Penny, but not to Leonard, unless you were doing a whole environment observation. If you were doing a whole environment observation, then you would look at the tone of voice and facial expressions to Leonard and from Leonard to Sheldon also. So it gets pretty complicated. That we're not 100% is not surprising. I'm pretty happy with our discussion here, and I'm pretty happy with our general ratio. I'd like us to get closer in that, and I bet as we looked in more situations and discussed it and honed our definitions more, we would get more consistent. Go ahead.
So Kathleen's asking if there are two different types of reinforcement happening at the same time. Should we count them as two separate things? And I would say if there's a verbalization happening and a different behavior, so a behavior that would be like giving a tangible or touch, something like that, then I would count that as two different types of reinforcement.
Okay.
Are you sharing? Okay. All right, so how do you go about analyzing the data? Now you've got it. What do you do with it? You would enter it into your monthly report or any other Excel document that you use. You want to look at the graph. You want to notice if anything looks out of the ordinary or if it looks the way that you think that it should. Right, if it looks out of the ordinary, you want to investigate why that might be. So if there's no negatives entered for an entire month and a whole bunch of positives entered, then you might question whether they're accurately reporting use of coercion or not, because we're all human and we all typically have some instances of coercion. When discussing the data, you want to talk about what looks good, what might be better, look for house-specific or staff-specific changes or trends, discuss anything you notice on your own observations, share and talk about the data at every A-team meeting, and then make sure that you're encouraging your agency to share the data with all staff that work at the agency, so not just the A-team. So now we're going to practice analyzing positive, negative data. This is data taken from an agency that is tiered. This is data from a single ISL. I want you guys to take 2 minutes to look at this graph, analyze it, and then put your thoughts into the chat box.
Write down some things you would talk about with your agency if you were their coach and this was their data.
All right, guys, please put in the chat box what you would talk to the agency about when looking at this graph, when sharing this graph with them. All right, so one person says it looks like the trend is decreasing the negative coercive interactions and increasing the rate of positive interactions. Another person says during observation 1 there were 2 negative interactions. Okay, since we don't have much time, I'm just going to talk about the graph, what I would share with the agency. I would say that this is data from ISLA. It's positive, negative information based on 5 10-minute observations. The thing that sticks out most to me is there's very low number of overall interactions, even lower number of positive interactions. And then kind of talking to them about why that might be. Was the client, sleeping for part of the observations?
It's 5 different 10-minute observations, so this represents 50 minutes of somebody's life where they really only got 1, 2, 4 positive interactions. So that's a very, very low rate of interactions that's happening in this ISL.
All right, we're going to practice again. So take a minute and a half to look at this graph and then type some comments based on the graph in the chat box. All right, so we have one response. If the rest of you could please get your responses in. So someone said 22 positive interactions that declined to 7 over a 4-month period, 0 negative interactions during the same time. Someone said they'd be interested in seeing the number of observations completed during each month. The number of positive interactions are trending downward, and they'd like to sit with the person doing these observations to do a reliability check with the coaches to check to see if 0 is what they are getting month after month with the coercives. Excellent. We wrote that down as well. And then it's hard to believe that there were no negative observations. The overall number of interactions are decreasing. They'd want to know, they would want to do some practice and discussion about what negative interactions look like.
So those are great discussion points that you guys picked up on. That's absolutely what our concerns would be. We wouldn't want to go, woohoo, there's no negative interactions, until we really verified that they're counting correctly.
We noted that positive interactions are trending way down. Negative interactions, like we said, are most likely not reported accurately, and some next steps might be additional training, coaching on how to collect positive negative data to ensure accuracy, and then retrain DSPs on the importance of stay close cool and provide positive consequences when they use it. All right, let's practice again for a minute and a half, and then put your responses in the chat box. All right, so we have two responses in. Positives are up and down, steadily rising, and then more positive than negative interactions. Negative interactions didn't increase by much. The number of negative interactions is on the rise. There's not consistency with positive interactions. So what we wrote is that positive interactions are pretty variable month to month, that negative interactions are trending up, and some next steps might be to see what might be different about the months. So is there a rock star staff who was on vacation when the positive interactions decreased? Were individuals not present for observations during those months? Like, were they working more? Did they get a new job? And then retrain staff on the importance of avoiding coercion and provide positive consequences when they do. We have
So Kathleen gave a really good summary of the goal is to have 4-to-1 positive interactions during our observations, and it shows that in a total of 72 interactions, we would need to see 116 more positives in order to get that positive and negative ratio. So the closest month to meeting our ratio was April, but negatives were really, really high in that month too. So there's some concerns. It's probably accurate data, because this is kind of what I'm expecting to see if people are interacting, and we probably need to polish up on the tools more, like Ree was saying. Do you want to do one more or no? Okay.
All right, so we're going to practice again. Take a minute and a half and write your comments in the chat box, please. All right, so while you guys formulate your thoughts, I'm going to start talking about what we noticed. So this is not raw numbers, not raw count like the previous graphs were. This is looking at average rate per minute. So that's one thing we noticed. It's aggregated data across 3 months. We noticed that home B has high rates of negative interactions at about 40%. And home E has no rate of negative interactions, which again is most likely inaccurate reporting.
So the other thing to notice about this average data, this is the same data that was displayed in the line graph when you had the total per observation. And one thing that you'll notice with averages is you don't get as much information. So we don't see the variability. We don't see that it's going up and down. We just get an average, and it might fool us into thinking everything's consistent. And so I prefer looking at the per session data, and then I might also do an average data just to give me a feel for it, but average data hides information.
And Kathleen said with homes A, C, D, and E, they're meeting or close to 80% of what we would expect for the 4-to-1 ratio, so we would want to check on their accuracy to make sure they're actually doing this well. That's exactly right. So we have one more graph. So again, take about a minute and think about what this graph is telling you and what you would say to agencies about it. So again, this graph is average rate per minute. It's the same data as the previous graphs we've looked at, but look at how amazing this agency looks like they're doing when we lump all of their data across the whole agency into one average. It makes it look like they have perfect 7-to-1 ratio, above perfect. So it could be a good snapshot of how the agency is overall doing. But as you can note from those previous graphs, there's a lot of missing information when we look at data this way. Kathleen said she'd like to know how many homes this agency supports. Are they counting supervisory to staff interactions to see if the whole agency is using it? How many total interactions were completed? Right now it looks like they're doing really well. And so looking at gathering additional information, exactly.
Okay, so we're going to stay on for about 2 minutes. If you have any additional questions about what the ATSC's role is in helping agencies to do positive and negative observations, or in discussing the data with them, we'll entertain those now. You can also send them to us via email later, and we'll post them with this for training our ATSC staff. So again, this is a reminder. This is not a webinar that you share with agencies. This is a webinar that is for ATSC staff to learn what their role is.
Amy asked, when discussing data with the agency, do we recommend using all of the graphs you just reviewed? It's up to you how you want to display the data for the agency. I actually used these graphs for one of the agencies I've been working with, and I shared all of them with them just to kind of highlight how the data looks differently depending on how we display it.
And home by home.
And then home by home. I didn't go down staff by staff, but that would be interesting to do as well.
And we are going to be making a version of a webinar to share with, that you can share with agencies or have agencies go on. In the meantime, you should use the PowerPoint that's on SharePoint for teaching agencies about positive and negative observations. And Amy asked, is there a tracker in Excel to help generate the graphs?
There is not at the moment, but that is something that I believe Kara and I are planning to work on. Yes, Kathleen, the new positive negative observation form has removed contingent and non-contingent for both coercives and stay close and use reinforcement. So we want to make it simpler, where we're just seeing is stay close happening, is use reinforcement happening, and is coercion happening. And yes, that's up to date on the SharePoint. It's in both the positive, negative. Kathleen's asking where on the SharePoint. It's in both the positive, negative observation folder and in the folder with the asset materials. And Amy's asking, do the ATSCs also do observations, or is it our goal to go when the agency coach can go? So ATSCs should be on site at the agency doing observations weekly for each agency. So if your coach is available to go, you would be doing a reliability with that coach. If the coach is not available that week, you would be doing the plus-minus observation of the DSP.
But we would still be asking the agencies to do their committed number of plus-minus observations also. Your observation is just a touch point to see how, are things still moving along the same way? Is there a positive and negative problem in the agency? Are tools still happening? So your data is something that you would use to see how things are still continuing, and you would share that data with the agency. It's a way to nudge the agency into working on that on their action plan, and to see that they need to keep taking data, and to see if things are different, wildly different when there's coach isn't there, those kinds of things.
All right, thank you guys so much. If you have any additional questions, just email them to Dr. Rogers and I, and we can post them with the webinar.